Appreciate everyone's time for being here. We're going to have a panel discussion on the current realities of make versus buy for cell and gene therapy manufacturing. My name is Kelvin Lee. I'm the Institute Director for NIIMBL, the National Institute for Innovation in Manufacturing Biopharmaceuticals, and I have the pleasure of moderating the panel. And what I thought I would do is first allow each of the panelists to introduce themselves, then we'll come back to what the goal of the session is. But in the meantime, I want to encourage you to pull out your phone or a tablet or your laptop because we're going to ask you to anonymously enter some information to give us some feedback as the session proceeds. So with that, we'll pass it on to each panelist to introduce themselves.
Great. Hi, I'm Melissa Carpenter, and I'm the CSO of Regenerative Medicine at ElevateBio. And I have a background in developing pluripotent stem cell therapies over about the last 25 years. So it's nice to be here. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rupa Pike. I work at Thermo Fisher Scientific as a Director of Enterprise Science and Innovation Partnerships. I have a background in regenerative medicine and cell therapy for over 15 years and direct cell therapy GMP manufacturing for over 5 years. Happy to be here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Thomas Fellner. I'm the Global Head for Account Management, Business Development, and Program Management at Lonza, global contract manufacturer, and I'm very pleased to be here today.
Hi, Kelvin. With these shields we have, are you going to beam us up later, like in Star Trek? Look, I'm Joe Tarnowski, and I'm the Senior Vice President of CMC Platform Development for Cell and Gene Therapy products with GSK, and I'm in the R&D division and also in the division of Medicinal Science and Technology, where many of our platforms are built for all of our products in the pipeline.
Great, thanks so much. And we thought about this topic of really make versus buy as being a really interesting topic, and as we had the prep call, as a good panel would normally do in advance of a meeting like this, we started to talk about it, and one of the things we realized is that it's actually a really complicated topic to think about. It's complicated because what kind of product are you bringing to market? Is it a vector? Is it a cell therapy? And so on. What type of organization are you? Are you a small company trying to get to the clinic? Are you a small company hoping to go commercial soon? Are you a very big company, et cetera? And so there's a lot of different flavors and perspectives that I think we want to try to cover today. And the words current realities at the opening of that session title also can mean a lot of different things. So you can think about current realities as today in our COVID world, or you can think about current realities, for example, in terms of the evolution of this part of the industry. So in order to get started, and again, reminder, pull out your phone, we encourage you to, we want to make sure we understand who's in the audience today. And so in order to do that, we want to encourage you to go to a website, slido.com. It will redirect you to another URL. And then where you see the hashtag, ask you to enter MTG on Mesa. Doesn't matter if you capitalize or not. And when you get there, you should see an audience poll question. We're going to start as easy as possible and just ask which of the following terms best describes the type of organization that you work for. And if everyone can take a moment to start entering into your laptop, tablet, or phone, and if everyone's connections are working, we should start to see this screen update in time. So if you go to slido.com, SLIDO.com, and at the hashtag enter MTG for meeting on Mesa, it should bring up a poll question, and if you just enter a response to that poll question, we'll get a little bit of a feel for who's in the audience today. Oh. And so it looks like a significant fraction are vendors and suppliers, as well as small companies. About a little less than 20% as contract manufacturers. We'll give people a little more time to enter their responses. So appreciate the willingness to play along. You'll see how this becomes useful in 2 or 3 minutes. So we just want to get a feel for how many people are in the audience and what the makeup is, and I think it's kind of interesting that there's a lot of vendors and suppliers in the audience.
That wasn't what I would have expected.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks for entering that. We're going to move to a second poll question. So you did the first one really successfully. We'll see how this second question does for everyone. And that is, what type of products do you work with? And you can check all that apply, and we tried not to be exhaustive, but just give some of the more common types of products. And so lentivectors, AAVs, other vector formats, autologous cell therapies, allogeneic, and other therapies. And you can pick your answers and submit those, and we'll...
Yeah. Allogeneic cell therapy is interesting.
I would think autologous would be higher.
Yeah.
Oh, no, it's kind of trending.
Yeah. But
It's always fun to see how the ratio of responses changes. I don't know if there's any indicator that people who work with certain products are faster with their phones than others.
I can't. It's tilted towards.
I mean, I'm half blind, right?
The other vector formats are a little slower, it looks like.
Can't see at all. So the top is allo, then auto, then
So it's interesting. A good fraction of people in the room and maybe online are working with cell therapies. Also a significant number with AAVs and lentivectors.
But it doesn't total 100%, which is perplexing.
Right, so it shouldn't total 100% because you could check multiple answers for each
okay.
person.
Got it.
Okay, so thanks very much for that. We're going to, at the same time that I start asking a question and giving my colleagues here a chance to answer, we're going to launch our next poll question, and this is one where you can type in an answer from your perspective, and we're going to talk about this question for almost the next 30 minutes, and so you'll have the opportunity to reflect at any point your response. You can do it now, you can do it later, you can enter multiple answers to this, but really the question for the panel, and I think for all of us in the room, is if you have to make a decision about make versus buy, what are some of the factors, what are the key factors that you would want to consider? And of course, a little bit of that's going to depend on your role within the ecosystem, but with that said, Melissa, can we just start with you? What's your perspective on the key factors, and maybe it's worth sharing a little bit about ElevateBio in that context?
Sure. Well, so make versus buy, they're both really imperfect decisions, is where I think you start. And it's about picking the path that you can best navigate. So I'll give you my perspective from the world that I live in, which is in pluripotent stem cell therapies. And for this, are you going to build it yourself or are you going to outsource it? I think you have to make that decision at multiple times during your manufacturing process. So for instance, in pluripotent stem cell therapies or iPSC therapies, you're going to have to make or buy your iPSCs, your starting material, and then you're either going to have to build inside or outsource your final product. And it depends on where you are in your cycle and how far you are along with all of your research and development, and your budget and your timeline is always one of the defining pieces of this. But as I think it through, when I think about the starting material, if you're going to go out and have somebody make you a cell line, that's going to take a year and a half, maybe more. It's going to take considerable resource. And then you're going to have to modify your process development probably based on that line. Because we know that iPSC lines are not all similar in how they differentiate. So going out and finding a cell line that's here, is this here today, that can be quite problematic. And being able to then go make a cell line can take quite a bit of time and money. So that's one of the things that we've done at Elevate is we are building a number of clinical grade or GMP grade IPS lines that are available for our partners to have prospectively, so you don't have to go make that cell line. And then at the other piece of it, in terms of the final product, this is actually, I mean, the iPSC making is quite complicated, but making your final product from an iPSC, we know that there's a lot of art, there's a lot of skill, and it can be quite difficult to tech transfer this to GMP operators that are trained in a very different way than your R&D scientists who develop the process. So a number of the groups that I've worked with in the past will outsource this, and then things won't go very well, and they'll bring it back in. And then they have to build a GMP facility. So you can imagine the amount of time and money that has been used during this fluctuation. So again, going back to what we're building at Elevate is a manufacturing infrastructure that allows us to be able to tech transfer reasonably well these these manufacturing processes into our facility, because we have a team of skilled scientists that actually do this. And so if you're looking to outsource this, trying to find a group that actually has that skill set can be really important. Or you have to build the GMP skill set inside, which again is equally important, and you may not have that inside. So that's maybe a meandering answer.
No, I appreciate that very much. And maybe we'll take a slightly different perspective. Joe, you work at a very large company. Right. What are some of the issues that come to mind when you think about that make versus buy decision?
Well, as you point out, Kelvin, we're a large multinational global company that has a variety of products, and when we really embarked on this journey in earnest about 6 years ago, we had pivoted from rare disease treatments to something more challenging, which would be solid tumors and cancers, and we decided to go after TCR-Ts. And so we're exclusively a platform that's ex vivo lentivirus modified. And when you look at our enterprise, that doesn't fit in any of our supply chain. We make tablets, we make pills, we make vaccines, we make sterile injectable biopharmaceuticals, so nothing really fit. Our research laboratories were good and set up for doing the development work. We had no GMP facilities per se. So our decision was pretty easy. We had to go out and buy it. And so the way we look at it, we kind of separate the two. There's the viral component, which can stand alone. And then there's the cell processing component, and then we can bring the virus to the cells and have them transduced there. So when we look for a partner there on the CMO, we're looking for capacity in our forecasting to make sure they can deliver on our schedule and on our timelines, and also speed to the clinic, because we want to get proof of concept, either fast to fail or fast to show it's working. And we're still kind of learning really how to do this technology and industrialize it. So it's a good place to kind of learn about that before we make the huge investments on CapEx, et cetera. And the most important point for us is any vendor we choose in the CMO space, in the buy decision, has to meet our quality standards. And I will say that becomes one of the largest hurdles, especially if you're going with a startup CMO, someone who doesn't have that experience. So we look for experience too when we're choosing vendors that can really support us on our development.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, as I have the ability to scroll through all these ideas here in real time, and certainly quality has come up multiple times. Cost versus time comes up as do the availability on the contract side space. Rupa, how about from your perspective at Thermo Fisher?
Sure. So I think that what we have learned over the time is people who are coming to do the contract manufacturing aspect, I think there are different things to consider, and that is what we talk to them, and they relay some information to us, and the gist of it is it really depends on what the company is, the size of the company, or what their business model is. So a lot of times, very large biopharma, very large biotech, or even medium-sized or small, medium-sized pharma biotech, they have already done GMP manufacturing because they've made biologics, they've made monoclonal antibodies, small molecules like Joe mentioned. They understand the GMP space, they understand the quality, the need for having a quality infrastructure, they understand how to talk to regulatory. But then there are small companies who have very large runways, and they've never done this before. And so we try to understand what their business model is, what their exit strategy is. And a lot of times, going to the CDMO is a better business model for them, because a lot of times they want to focus on R&D. They want to focus all their efforts on R&D, make their process robust, but they don't have the GMP experience, the quality infrastructure, the understanding of the regulatory space, and therefore going to a CDMO makes sense to them. The other aspect is they have an exit strategy. They look at the gold standards in the industry, which is a partnership between Novartis and UPenn, or a partnership between a small company and a large biopharma for licensing their technology or outright purchasing it. And they understand that if they have a partner, a CDMO, which will help them do this right the first time, their exit strategy becomes stronger. If it means getting more venture capital, it means giving licensing rights to biopharma, and biopharma who wants to do this also feel more comfortable if the CDMO is managing the end-to-end operations. And the last thing I want to say is Thermo Fisher prides itself in having integrated offerings. So we are one of the CDMOs that you can start with us and stay with us. So we start with plasmid manufacturing, viral vector manufacturing, cell therapy manufacturing, and also provide the cold chain logistics through Fisher Bioservices. And we try to make the journey of these small companies who have never done this before easier to help them achieve whatever their goals are.
Thank you. Tomas, what is your perspective from Lonza?
Yeah, just listening to Rupa, I could say we do the same but better, but just joking.
I knew you were going to say that.
It was too easy. Too easy. No, so I've been doing this now for 10 years. And, when this meeting here on the Mesa was a one-day event focused on the scientific aspects and not so much on the CMC or general industrial aspects. And as you can envision, having this done for so many years, I have touched almost every technology or any client that had or company that had an interest of outsourcing or working with the CDMO. And this is where I wanted to start actually of taking you through this journey. And the journey in most cases, starts with the process development. And here it comes down to what is the business model, as you said, right? What does the company really try to achieve? But the advantage of focusing on why would you even choose a CDMO, why would you even engage, is that there is a depth and a variety of knowledge, know-how, expertise, because right, a CDMO comes across so many different technologies and companies. And I always like to say, we have learned from our mistakes, right? And this is a huge advantage that someone gets and wants to engage with a CDMO. Yeah? And I would go one step further. Anyone who would say, no, we never make mistakes, right, is a liar. So this is one aspect when you start working with the CDMO you want to look at, right? At the same time, CDMOs at times have access to technology, proprietary technology, which is an advantage. I mean, at the same time, right, we see the opposite, where companies just want to hold on to their proprietary technologies, where there is a lot of reluctance of sharing this for good reasons, right? And here a decision might be made a little later in the game, right? Of not saying, okay, we don't engage in the process development with the CDMO, but then definitely we want to transfer a developed process in for, let's say, clinical manufacturing, right? Which brings me to the second part, right? Where you start engaging with the CDMO and say, okay, why don't we do clinical manufacturing with the CDMO? And here are some considerations why it makes sense is the capacity, right? And here it comes down a little bit to whether you do a viral vector, whether you do autologous or allogeneic, right? For autologous, if you are a low throughput, let's say, orphan disease, or even, phase 1-2 trial with, let's say, 20 patients, or even less than 20 patients, right? Starting to build out your own capacity may not make the most sense from an economical perspective, because at a CDMO, right, you can share capacity, right, by using different models. At the same time, what we also see is, let's say, companies with very strong pipelines, even in early phase, they argue they want to have their own setup because it gives them the flexibility, right? They can still do process development while they are already transitioning into the GMP suites, right? And they can just move one GOI in, one out, right? Gives them a lot of flexibility. I would argue, yes, it's a valid strategy, but at the same time, you can get the same at a CDMO, right? It's just how you set up the partnership. But where I think it really starts to matter is when you migrate towards the commercialization. I mean, as we all know, there are not a hell lot of products in the market right now, but there is definitely a rush of a very nice pipeline behind the first approved therapies. And here, what I would argue, and we live through this as we speak, right, is the expertise around the commercialization, right, the process validation, the characterization, the assays, and so on and so forth. And not to promote my own company, I'm not even mentioning the name, but if you have undergone, also on the biologics world like others, right, there's a lot of knowledge that has been gained over the years, right, in preparation for PAIs. And this is what I call de-risking, right? And this is what we are exposed to a lot, where this is the time where you don't want to trip, right, as a company, that all of a sudden you cannot pass, let's say, that hurdle, that step, that important step. And here another aspect is cost of manufacturing, and unfortunately this is a reality we live in. And again, here it depends what are we looking, allogeneic, are we looking autologous, are we looking at viral vector manufacturing, and what type, right? That there are decisions that need to be made where you have to do in-house just from a commercial perspective, right? Because reimbursement will not support, and I mean, this is no secret I'm breaking, right? I mean, as a CDMO, you have cost, you have also margin, right? And this comes together. Of course, now you can run your models. What does this mean if I do it in-house? When is the tipping point of capacity, and on and so forth. So a long story short, coming back to my 10 years of exposure, that I got a little bit anxiety when I was asked to be on this panel, because there is no one answer. There's so many considerations, there's so many different discussions to be had, and I think I had them all. But at the same time, it provides the field a good opportunity, right, to have a CDMO and to also have the opportunity to do it in-house. And I would say there is no right or wrong, it depends on the situation.
So I'll let any of you respond to anything that was spoken, but I'll maybe just follow up on, Thomas, you made some comments about capacity. And some of the, at least one respondent in the room mentioned that demand, presumably for your product, should be a consideration. So I'm just curious, for any of you, how you think about anticipated demand for products as influencing kind of a make versus buy decision, or advice that you would be giving an organization as they face the make versus buy decision.
So I can go. I just want to add, I do want to say that you can believe that you do things better than us and be happy in that belief. I'm okay with that.
We have demonstrated it.
Maybe I should move that wall between you a little bit closer.
Yeah. Time to speed it up.
I had to say that, Tom.
You started it.
You started it. But anyway, let's move on. I had the last say, so let's move on. So
That's not a surprise.
I do agree with everything that Thomas said, de-risking the process. But to come back to addressing the capacity, CDMOs do have the ability, again, based on what we have seen, the number of manufacturing campaigns that we've done, that we understand cost and labor modeling. We understand how to not keep a GMP suite empty because it costs a lot of money to keep a GMP suite empty. So the labor and cost modeling can be addressed in terms of, okay, RMAT designation, phase 1, phase 2 together, efficacy window, moving to phase 3, and then really understanding BLA and commercialization. You know, is this an orphan disease? Is this, you know, the standard liquid tumors or solid tumors, and helping someone who comes to you as a CDMO understand the capacity. So you are looking ahead, forward, to understand this is your capacity when you go into commercial. You cannot just think about clinical manufacturing, which is maybe 20, 30 patients in phase 1, you know, 100 or so in phase 2, 300 in phase 3. It shouldn't end there. If your model is a model for success, you have to think about commercial manufacturing. And that's where capacity becomes a very important factor, right? And a lot of people are just thinking clinical, but then what? Or maybe do clinical in-house, but start having the conversation with a CDMO if you're going to engage them for capacity for commercial, because you want to plan ahead.
So I would just add a little bit to that in terms of the complexity. So if you want to think about making 1,000 doses or 5,000 doses or 10,000 doses, which I know I've seen a lot of these models where we're going to, you know, permeate the market, and we're going to do 10,000 doses every year or every month, and just the logistics of that and developing the way to scale this. For the most part, for most of these therapeutics, at least in my space, that hasn't been developed yet. So are you going to have your CDMO manufacture and create all of this IP as well as, I mean, and these are interesting decisions to make, or do you capture it inside your own company and maintain control of that particular kind of a process? But it's, once you've made that amount of material, how are you going to get through the fill and finish? How are you going to get through the distribution? Are there going to be processing centers? Is it a product that can be frozen? So it goes, I think, considerably beyond just making 10,000 doses. It's all of the infrastructure in using that and having that go out to the patients.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kelvin, you know, this is a constant debate we have all the time because, as we heard today during the plenary session, there's the auto versus allo. We're an Autoplay. And you know, that's like building a Bentley every day for a product. So it's hand-built, it's very personalized, it's customized. And you know, that does drive expense. There's a lot of testing involved. And then there's a lot of small indications we're going at, and you don't have the volume drivers that you would see and enjoy with a typical pharmaceutical or a biopharmaceutical. So, you know, we talk about that all the time. So, you know, there could be a model where, gee, find that perfect CDMO that's got the capacity, but it's got you know, several products in there that they can help distribute that cost and help drive it down for everybody. Because at the end of the day, it's about the patient and trying to get this out to everybody. And cost will be a driver. Now, we heard a compelling argument today that allo can get us there, but, you know, there's a lot to do yet. Autos are the things that are working at the moment. So we're going to have to bring in automation, efficiency, robotics. You know, we got to get a lot of the complexity of the manual labor out of making these things. And I was reminded of an earlier talk today. I think Sybil Danby was here on one of the panels, and she was talking about even viral vectors. You know, we need to make them look more like a MAB process instead of these, you know, 4 plasmids into a attachment-dependent cells. Well, you know, at GSK, we've actually developed that, and we've turned it into a MAB process. We have a cell line that works very well, and we've actually drove down the cost of making those down to where it's very, very reasonable contribution, but that's only part of the equation. There's the whole cell processing, the testing, and everything else, and we've got to get better about that. So, you know, I think we still have innovation to do, and we need to get therapies into earlier lines instead of fourth line therapies where the patient populations are small, so we can get it out and really maximize the value for everybody and help get that industrialization aspect that helps drive down costs.
Indeed. So one of the responses that somebody typed in about factors to consider that struck me a little bit, and I'll ask people if they have any thoughts on this, is IT infrastructure. So partly that you could interpret that as bigger companies that have more established infrastructure might be in a different space than maybe some of the smaller companies, but I'm just kind of curious what IT infrastructure might mean from your perspectives in terms of the make versus buy perspective. It's an open question.
Well, I'll take a shot. We're looking at that very actively. We call it a digital ecosystem. Yeah. And we would like to set up, a completely digital paperless environment where we have portals to access in and out. And it really helps drive down cycle time. And one thing that we try to do, the vein-to-vein time was mentioned this morning. And some of these can be excruciatingly long, and sometimes they're shorter. But, the patients we treat really don't have time to wait. Yeah. We hear this all the time when we're doing our clinical trials. So we try to expedite that as fast as we can. But, we've made some mistakes just setting up our contracts. We had no KPIs in there that held any accountability to the CMO. And we've had the ability to change that now where we have performance parameters in there. And if you do well and get our cycle times down, you get rewarded. But if you don't, you get penalized. And that was a tough negotiation with one of our CMOs. It took us months to resolve, but now we're there. And I'll tell you what, it's starting to shrink times down for us. But there's also still a lot of paper in the environment, and a lot of auditing, and a lot of review. So we've got to go digital and review by exception and be able to enter data in and do kind of real-time release, because there's always that lag when you make the product of when is it getting released. And there can be significant sometimes if you have deviations and kappas and everything else to close out. So I don't know, that's my personal view. You guys might have some other views on it.
So I do want to address one thing that everybody, just like Joe said, everybody is paying attention to having a very sound IT infrastructure, because paperless is important, going electronics, whether it is managing MBRs or whether it is quality, doing their audits, their signatures, reviews, whether it's a person in plant. I think COVID has kind of heightened the need to have this infrastructure. There was always talks about physical and digital connectivity, having automation platforms, maybe having AI, but also the IT infrastructure is important from a digitalization of data, digitalization of supply chain, and how things are moving in real time. That has become important. So I think IT infrastructure to manage the process parameters, the actual manufacturing of the operations, to manage the ecosystem around it, whether it's QC, supply chain, kitting, cold chain logistics, all of that, to have that connectivity gives everybody peace of mind, and as somebody said, Thomas said, de-risking the process, right? Because at the end, everybody is concerned, and should be rightfully so, about the safety and efficacy of the clinical or commercial doses we are making.
How would you all describe the maturity of the implementation of some of the more advanced IT paradigms that are out there? So, we talked a little bit here about a world in which everything can be digital, and obviously you can potentially have that real-time release. And in that perfect world, we're not there yet, from what I understand. Some are perhaps further along than others, but where do you think we are? Pick an arbitrary quantitative scale or qualitative scale to describe where we are as a field.
1 to 10?
Yeah, 1 to 10, or we're not doing so good, or an A through F.
I think we've got a long way to go. From what I've seen, there's quite a lot to be developed and automated, and it's quite early days. I don't know, from the larger companies, there might be more sophistication, but from what I've seen, there hasn't been a whole lot yet. So.
I agree with Melissa. I think we have long ways to go. I think the only thing that I have seen in talking to colleagues and knowledge leaders and thought leaders in the field, I think the data management electronically is good. It, of course, always can be improved, but the rest of the other aspects of IT, I think we have ways to go for that.
I would say it got the right focus a while ago, and it's accelerating, right? I also see it is in our CDMO that this has been getting a lot of attention and very fast implementation, like switching over. Everything you said, pretty much. I don't need to repeat that because there is an absolute need. And again, you need to distinguish a little bit what therapy you're looking at, but for an autologous, chain of identity, chain of custody, how you link this within your, then the manufacturing is absolute key if you then talk about a certain throughput, right? I mean, you don't necessarily need it at a lower throughput, but definitely then when you go towards the hundreds and thousands, you definitely need this. You cannot live without it anymore.
I'll offer a comment too, and we're getting there. We got archipelagos of things that are going on, right? You can use your iPhone and monitor a bioreactor from your bedroom and get alarms. That's great and wonderful, and it does improve efficiency, but we don't have all the linkages. We can track cells incredibly from patient back to patient using technology that's out there and adapting it for our use, and it works very well. But we don't have the physician ready to put an order entry in and trigger things and then set the process off. We still have to work that out. And remember, our supply chain starts with that patient and ends with the patient. They have to be scheduled to be apheresed. The apherese has to be moved into your cell processing center. You've got to bring the virus in to get it transduced, and then you've got to do all your testing and back out. So those parts are coming together. We've got the vision. We want it to be cloud-based. We want it to be very simple, but there's a lot of work to do, as was said here. But I think it's out there. I think it's doable. I mean, Amazon does a great job. If you need a bottle of detergent tomorrow, it's there, in a couple of hours.
True.
So, the possibility of getting it solved is out there. I think it's real.
It feels like the more likely place where some of those innovations will come is not only for companies who work in that space, but perhaps from the contract manufacturing side of things, right? Because that's where it's probably not going to come from the small company side trying to bring a product to market. It maybe might come from some of the bigger companies, but I can imagine the value returned back to the CDMOs might even be greater from a business perspective. So I'm going to have us go to the next poll question. It's actually our last poll question, and we're going to shift a little bit towards talking about the current realities side of the current realities in make versus buy. So we're curious for everyone in the audience, again, pull out your phone. What are some of the current realities, in quotes, that are related to the make versus buy decision? And we parenthetically put some examples. You can re-enter those if you'd like. But some of the things we talked about in our prep call, and I hope we'll talk a little bit today, are about raw material supplies, limited capacity, workforce, not having enough workforce or appropriate workforce, patient access, COVID drug development as a competition for resources. So kind of curious from the audience perspective, but I'll start on stage here. When we think about the term current realities, it can mean that we're in a young field. It can also mean that people have to wear masks every day, and there's all that goes with the world that we're in. So Rupa, maybe I'll start with you. What are some perspectives you have in this space?
So I would like to address it from both perspectives, Kelvin, but I'll start first with current realities, which is the challenges of COVID. And I think some of the things that we have learned and we were forced to learn or implement because of COVID, can they become best practices moving forward? Because we've learned that it can be done a certain way, and can that become a best practice? So, and I'll take the raw materials, since that was the first one mentioned, and I see that up there, is, people have become very sensitive and aware and knowledgeable about, even small companies, about choosing their vendors, choosing multiple vendors, not just one vendor, especially for the critical raw materials. Understanding the vendor's raw material supplier, understanding business continuity, understanding if this vendor that they are choosing, do they understand the regulatory space? Have they drug master files deposited already? Do they have a good way of managing TSE, BSE certification? Are they transparent in their relationship? So if there is critical supply is low, are they going to inform you ahead of time so you can take those actions and not have to go into a mitigation mode? So I think choosing the vendor for the raw materials that are critical has become a very important issue. And the things that were put in practice, like can you do virtual audits with these vendors? Can you understand their business continuity plan? Can there be some kind of connectivity between the sponsor or the CDMO or the CDMO and the vendor where supply needs, demands, all of those things are evaluated on a regular basis. So I think those things have brought us into, again, bringing some of the points back is cloud connectivity, or something that we've heard a lot is creating a digital twin, which is a virtual replica of your actual supply chain process where there is, as Joe mentioned, COI and COC, chain of custody, chain of identity, and in real time understanding the dynamics of the circular supply chain. Or another thing that I've read and heard is using AI to understand demand trends. Using AI to understand demand trends was very helpful for companies because many of the raw materials used for viral vector manufacturing, gene therapies, or gene-modified cell therapies were diverted to manufacturing of the vaccines. And so if understanding that, are those trends going to help us forecast demand, find suppliers, line up things ahead of time to not have the bottleneck that we see? Can that be a best practice? So those are some of the things that I feel are important. The resilience and the flexibility of supply chain and making it more robust from the lessons we've learned during COVID, and to put them in best practices to just maybe change how supply chain is looked at would be important.
Thank you. Tomas, what are your thoughts on current realities?
Yeah, just to add what Rupa said, of course, the raw material supply chain topic is a topic that kept everyone up for the last 1.5 years. And I'm still amazed by how limited the impact overall has been. But I have seen the effort that was put into getting your hands on raw materials, plasticware, you name it. And the latest was even pipette tips, right? But I think enough said about this. I've been trying to read the comments here because I'm very curious what the audience has to say, but it's a little hard with the lights here. I think I picked up on one thing, it's workforce, right? Having enough trained talent. And this is definitely something that the industry is facing right now. And I wouldn't say it's just because of COVID. This is just the growth of the industry we live in. And again, this is not CDMO specific. This spans from small to large and everything in between, that there is definitely a struggle to bring the talent in at the speed this industry is growing. The positive is, right, that it generates new opportunities for young people, and you can train, you can develop, but it takes a little time, right? And so here, this is the balance one needs to find of managing through this. And the good thing is everyone faces this, even if some might not admit that this is the truth. But this is just the reality we live in. COVID itself, again, I'm very amazed by how little, and here I can only speak about Lonza, how little impacted we actually were because the right measures have been chosen from the get-go, right? I mean, and it was very, call it harsh, right? You had to really make sure you isolate, you only had people in the facilities that had to be there, right? There was just no appetite for, well, I want to see my colleagues. No, it's not possible. You had to adhere to testing. And again, I'm amazed by how little the impact was we have seen.
Yeah, you made a comment, Tomas, about opportunities on the workforce side for younger people, but I'd say there's also a lot of opportunities for those who are a little more senior, as our entire industry continues to grow.
No, absolutely, right.
But I understand completely
see
what you're saying.
especially
Yes.
this opportunity
Operators,
for
GMP.
exactly to start from the
Agreed.
ground up, right?
Absolutely. Joe, what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, just kind of playing off the COVID disruption. I mean, at first we thought it would be inconsequential, but then the reality struck. And, the patients we treat with, terminal cancers require ICU beds. Those beds were taken away. And so clinical trials were put on a pause because it had to be diverted to COVID patients who were very sick. The right thing to do. And so, we end up getting past that. And we've got about 40 to 50 clinical sites that are active around, the globe. And we have to go out and put them onto our systems of how we want to manage the quality, collect the pheresis. We couldn't go out and train those sites because travel was restricted. And then if you had a batch made for a patient that was ready to go, you had to be very careful about scheduling with airlines because those planes weren't flying anymore. And we had to do a lot of fancy footwork and some really creative ways to get things moved from the US back to Europe and vice versa so you could treat your patients. And then at our CMOs, things were just going along and we were continuing on, and then people would get sick. And the workforce was now, either quarantined, they couldn't show up, they had to shut down, slow down. It happened to us in pockets, and that was somewhat disruptive. We didn't have a lot of raw material disruption until a bit later, when mRNA, proved to be the way to treat. Some of the nucleotides and raw materials started to dry up a bit, but we didn't have as much disruption on that side as we did on more the treatment side and distribution side.
Melissa, any thoughts?
Sure, I've got a couple of thoughts. My first thought is taking this back to the build versus buy.
Okay.
So if you wanted to build now, this supply chain issue, it's not just about our scientific reagents, it's about getting the plywood. It's about building things now. It's much more expensive and it takes more time. So I think that they rather tie together. But the other piece of this is about the personnel, and the others have talked about this quite a bit. But when you think about the amount of training that goes into a team that's going to execute in the suite, and then we're talking now that you can't have as many people in your facilities, so maybe you're going to have shifts. So maybe you need 2 teams that have this specialized training and they're going to do shift work. Well, then maybe one of those people gets sick or is contact traced and you have to quarantine. So maybe you need another team. And then you start thinking about the logistics of training all of those people, and then the fact that you have to social distance and you can't have enough people in the lab at any particular time, and it expands your timelines. So I think that there's still some things that we're working out. I've seen this in a lot of the different groups that I work with, that they're still navigating this, and it seems to be getting more expedient now than it was, say, a year ago. But I think it's really trickled into a lot of different parts of how we manufacture and think about, again, building versus buying. And if we can't build our own facility, then the queues for the CDMO is going to get longer. And I just don't think we've got it sorted out yet.
Great.
So I think we touched on this a little bit, but there's an entry from somebody in the audience specifically mentioning cold chain. So wonder if there's any experiences anyone's heard of out in the ecosystem as it relates to cold chain challenges as part of our current realities?
No.
The answer might be no.
Well, I mean,
I
you know,
think
look.
it ties with the whole supply chain ecosystem.
The broader supply chain, okay.
I mean, our products generally are shipped frozen conditions.
Yeah.
Yeah, right?
And, you know, it's the typical issue we have to deal with for any, you know, cold chain pharmaceutical. You've got to validate the chain, you got to get your shipping line set up and validate it. And, you know, these are fragile things we're doing. We're delivering live cells back. So you got to make sure that they don't thaw, they don't overheat, they don't get damaged along the way. So that is a consideration, and it does take a bit of time to get that all resolved and worked out. But I just want to go back on the points about what kind of learnings we had and disruption we had. We also there were some positives about the COVID of ways of working, and I said we had problems starting up clinical sites and all that, but we also got creative and started using virtual reality and Google Glass and sites that were well known to us, and we wanted to modify our protocol. We could do it virtually, and so some clever innovation got implemented in there, and I think that'll become a way of working as well. When we get into we talk about digital ecosystem and bringing in other things, but getting that whole network set up, we can do some pretty amazing things with technology now too.
Yeah, even transferring technologies, let's say, into the CDMO from a lab, from the developer, right?
Yeah.
Where all of a sudden creative ways had to be found, and they worked.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think we did some of that too, and trying to get assays set up between each other and validated, and it was done in a very creative and inventive way.
So I think that overall there's been a lot of efficiencies that have developed.
Correct.
They were painful to learn, but I think that at the end of it, we've learned a lot of these tools that have made it, I think, will be better going forward.
Yeah, I think, I sometimes reflect on what would have happened if all this COVID business had happened 10 or 15 years ago before some of the technologies were so widely available, what that would have meant for everyone's productivity and ability to get their work done, a totally different situation. There is one response to this current realities question that I'm going to give a couple of our panelists a chance to respond to, and simply put, it said GMP price gouging. So any reactions or thoughts to that you want to respond to that? And there were a few other interesting comments. We can see one on this confidence monitor about there's been a lot of consolidation in the buy space. And so I think there's just a lot of questions around where we are in the ecosystem these days. Any thoughts on cost on the buy side that you want to respond to? Maybe you don't want to respond to that.
Well, look,
Don't know how to.
there's a reality that there's a seller's market on some of the things we need because there's a lot of competition for it, and you've got to get in line, get scheduled, and I'm not going to make any accusations, but it is costly to do some things that we need.
Indeed, fair enough. There was one, I'm going to just ask one last question, and then I think we'll wrap the session. So there was one question that was posed that I'll give anyone a chance to comment on, but one thing that people think about is what is the future state going to look like, perhaps especially for in the cell therapy space, around whether there's going to be more of a centralized model or perhaps a more distributed manufacturing model. Any perspectives or thoughts people want to share on what that future looks like?
I'll take a shot at it. So I think, the point of care or the decentralized model was always discussed. And it was, people always talked about it. It's possible, we can do this, especially for autologous. But COVID kind of brought that up again to the forefront because of people thinking, okay, if we have manufacturing either near the hospital, close to the hospital, somewhere, can we bypass the complex supply chain? And can we, deliver the product faster and also have no other problems associated with, taking the cryopreserved product from point A to point B? I think that there was an excellent paper published by Dr. Marks and Dr. Gottlieb in New England Journal of Medicine a couple years ago, just prior to COVID. And they proposed two things, which I think gives more encouragement to people who are thinking about point of care, at least for the clinical trials. And one of them is There is still a sponsor, but there are centers of excellence, and under that sponsor's guidance, quality assurance system, and everything that that sponsor can provide in terms of best practices, do manufacturing at centers of excellence. That was one model. And the second model was centers of excellence who are academic centers can come together, come up with a standardized manufacturing process and manufacture the product, and then based on their data, apply for a BLA. So one or the other can work. There is encouragement. It has other issues related. FDA might be very concerned about how quality is managed, right? Because that's very important from a safety perspective. But I think these two models give us hope for autologous therapies, that people want to now consider the distributed or a modified point of care model, and maybe it might become a reality in the future.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, just to add, decentralization is one of the key aspects we at Lonza believe in, right? And we believe it goes through technology, right? Simplifying, in the end, the manufacturing will be key. As soon as you have a complex process, decentralizing it, or let's say putting it within hospitals, is going to be very challenging. I mean, the other trend is definitely the allogeneic approach, right? That doesn't mean autologous is going to disappear, but we see more and more influx of allogeneic approaches to usually autologous therapies being developed. So predicting the future, I don't know, but definitely there is an attempt to test it and see how we can make this work.
Yeah, I think I support what everybody said, and I think it's coming. I think it's in the realm of possibility, and it may be the solution for the niche market when you don't have high volume patients, but you've got very specialized centers out there, and you could put the technology in their hands, as long as you could deal with the regulatory issues and who holds the license, and you've got the virtual reality laid over and all the IT that prevents interruption of the protocols and all that. So nothing happens there that might be unsafe for the patient. And then I guess the question that we think about in that model is, where does the liability reside at the end of the day if something goes wrong? Does it come back to the innovator, or is it the point of use? So we got to work those out. But I think that might be a solution for the medicines that are low volume, that you can't put all the infrastructure together to make it profitable for anybody to do in a large way.
Any final thought, Melissa, on that? Or
No, I agree with the comments previous. So.
Yeah, I think it'll be, as we see technology mature, I think once we have those technologies, it'll be really interesting to see what that future brings. But we're not quite there yet, it sounds like. So with that, I do want to thank the panelists for their time and their expertise. I want to thank you for your participation and engagement, and hope you enjoy the rest of the meeting.